In this video, I will provide a brief overview of media advocacy, a type of campaign that can be used to promote health and is nothing like the campaigns we've discussed so far. Media advocacy will be defined here as the strategic use of media to support community organizing and advance policies that make environments healthier. This approach brings together science, which helps us to understand a health-related problem, policy, to solve that problem, and communication, to mobilize the community in an effort to convince policymakers to enact that policy. A key point is that we are targeting policymakers to bring about policy changes, including changes to laws and regulations to promote health. Media advocates assume that death, illness, and disability are often more about the environments in which we live than individual actions. The term environment will be used broadly to refer to the social, political, and physical ecology in which we live our lives. The metaphor of a stream is used often in public health to differentiate a policy focus from a focus on individual behavior. If we paddle upstream, we will find the social, political, and physical environments that shape people's health. Downstream is where the individuals live. A fish cannot be healthy downstream if there are polluting factories upstream. By the same token, if you live in a community that is polluted, unsafe, and is a food desert where fresh produce cannot be found, you are going to have trouble being healthy. Media advocacy then is focused on primary prevention, on keeping people healthy by giving them healthy environments through better policies at the corporate, local, state, and federal levels. Examples are in order at this point. Most information and social marketing campaigns work downstream by trying to change individual behaviors. Media advocacy, as we have seen, works upstream by trying to improve social, political, and physical environments through policy. Let's compare what this might mean for two different health issues. We will begin with the problem of teenage obesity. A typical health communication campaign would attempt to convince kids to eat healthier foods. The focus is on the teen. A media advocacy approach would place pressure on school boards and principals to remove soda and candy vending machines from schools, or perhaps stock them with only healthy drinks and fresh fruits and vegetables. Pressure would also be applied to improve the quality of the food service menu in the schools and increase the level of physical activity in schools. On the topic of smoking, a typical campaign would target the individual smoker with messages about the dangers of smoking and perhaps offer tips on quitting. The media advocacy approach pressures governments at all levels to establish no smoking zones, ban ads that target kids, and tax cigarettes to the point where they become unaffordable. Traditional campaign approaches can reinforce media advocacy campaigns. Campaigns that increase awareness and create favorable attitudes in individuals can move public opinion in a direction that favors policy changes. Now we will shift gears and talk about two theories used in media advocacy to inform decisions. The first is agenda setting theory. Agenda setting theory, and the research for which it is responsible, examines how the research, especially news, sets the policy agenda for our society. At any given time, there are so many issues the media could cover. Most are ignored, however, by the news. As a result, most issues do not get placed on the public's agenda. Media advocacy activists use theory and research on agenda setting to understand what they need to do to get the attention of the news establishment. The media's agenda essentially determines what we are thinking about as a society at any given point in time. In contrast, framing theory seeks to explain how we think about the issues that have been placed on society's agenda by the media. News stories are framed by the media. That is, the media provides a perspective, a frame of reference, that helps the audience to extract meaning from news stories. Media researchers often talk about episodic and thematic frames. The default American news frame tends to be episodic. That is, the news tends to report upon specific events. For example, by reporting on specific crimes, the news tends to foster the belief that crime is caused by the personal moral failings of people, of criminals. The news rarely talks thematically about how crime is caused by poverty, racial discrimination, poor schools in low-income communities, and so forth. Media advocacy seeks to frame issues thematically. The message is that our health is affected by where we live, work, and play. The solution is better policies. At this point, we will quickly review the overall process of media advocacy. First, we will need to define the problem and determine its policy solutions. Next, we will need to identify the people who can implement or change the policy that will solve the problem. Depending on the problem, we could be talking about a specific individual, the mayor or governor, for example, a council, such as the city council, a school board, a legislature, a corporation CEO, and maybe even the President of the United States. We then need to determine how to reach these people through the media. We could reach them directly through editorials that call them out. We could reach them by creating community outrage that leads to protests at their office. We could use the media to mobilize people to go to city council meetings, board meetings, and so on. Next, we need to determine our message. What will we say to the policymaker? Typically, we need to describe the problem, offer concrete policy recommendation, and maybe even do some shaming and blaming. No one ever said that media advocacy has to be nice. Finally, we need to develop a strategy to get the media's attention, that is, to put our issue and cause on the public's agenda by getting the news to cover it. Finally, we need to develop a strategy to get the media's attention, that is, to put our issue and cause on the public's agenda by getting the news to cover it. Typically, we are talking about getting a specific journalist, reporter, or editor interested in the issue. We will now look in more detail about specific aspects of our strategy, beginning with our media strategy. The first consideration is whether or not media attention is even needed. It is possible that policymakers have not acted because they are unaware of the problem or our policy solution. If there is resistance to change, then we will probably need to get the media to shine a spotlight on the problem. It is well known that journalists are attracted to stories about conflict, tragedy, innovations, and scandals. The media advocate should always make personal contact with policymakers first and treat escalation through media advocacy as a backup strategy. Once you have decided that media attention will be needed, determine which news outlets will be more helpful. For a local issue, you will want to go to local news media, for example, the local newspaper editor. For state or national issues, the relevant media outlet will be different. The media advocate also needs a strategy for gaining access to the journalists who set the media agenda. The first step is to identify the key personnel at the news outlets you are targeting. Who is the editor who assigns stories to reporters? Who are the reporters who typically write stories related to your issue? Media advocates need to build relationships with these people. Media advocates typically need to bring about many policy changes over a period of years to solve a problem. The relationships that the advocate develops today will be useful tomorrow. Once you know these people, you can pitch the story to them. Find the angle that will get them interested. We've already mentioned 4 angles: conflict, tragedy, innovations, and scandal. Finally, you need to find the right time to make your pitch. One common strategy is to piggyback on other issues and events in the news. Suppose that your goal is to get healthier foods into your local schools. Let's say also that the U.S. Surgeon General has just come out with a report on obesity and type 2 diabetes in American teenagers. You could talk to your contacts at the local news outlets and call their attention to the local angle for this story. Once you've gotten the media interested in your cause, you need to have a sharp message. Your message needs to answer 3 questions. What is the problem? What is the solution? Why does all of this matter anyway? The message, of course, needs to be framed thematically and in a way that supports the policy. It needs to call attention to some aspect of the environment that can be assigned responsibility for the problem, an aspect that would be fixed by your policy solution. The messenger is important in media advocacy. The messenger can be the message. Messengers need to be authentic. Spokespersons should be personally affected by the issue or at least an expert on the issue. Authentic messengers are not necessarily good with the media. Spokespersons may need media training. They may need help in saying things in simple and compelling ways. They may also need help in talking thematically, not episodically. The media advocate needs to think strategically about story elements, the pieces that reporters put together to create a story. Elements of a story can include images, such as photos, quotes of people in the know from the local community and beyond, stories that support the cause's basic message, statistics, including their visual representation through charts and graphs, testimonials, academic studies, and so forth. The important point is that the media advocate can provide these elements to journalists as background information. The advocate can make sure that these materials support the campaign's basic message and point to the policy changes being advocated. There's no guarantee that the journalist will use these materials, of course, but it is worth trying to shape the journalist's story. Story elements should be presented in what are sometimes called media bites. When dealing with television and radio, the phrase sound bites is often used. The idea is that the problem and policy solution needs to be presented using short, compelling, and memorable messages that are easily digested. These strategies include simple statements that get to the heart of the problem. Analogies can be used as well. For example, I once heard an activist comparing the futility of a non-smoker trying to avoid smoker cigarette exhaust with being stuck in a swimming pool with someone else who is peeing in it. Crude? Yes. Memorable? Definitely. It is also important to use very concrete visual language. For example, if you are promoting policies to increase childhood vaccine, you might describe vaccines as guardians of your child's health. We can easily visualize a guardian protecting a child. You also need a media bite that clearly and quickly states what action needs to be done at that particular point in time. Statistics are used to quantify the problem a policy change addresses. However, many people have trouble understanding numbers. For this reason, statistics need to be recast to make them interesting. Media advocates talk about such recasting as social math. For example, many people would have trouble understanding the claim that the homicide rate in California last year was 5 murders per 100,000 people. It would be better to report that one person is murdered in California every 6 hours. Even a child can understand that. Visuals are critically important story elements that merit special attention. Let us suppose that we want to address air pollution from a local oil refinery and the asthma it causes or worsens among the town's citizens. We could organize community protests and call a press conference in front of the oil refinery. That's a compelling visual. We could also invite the press to a memorial service at the gravesite of a child from our community whose parents believe the child died from uncontrolled asthma caused by the oil refinery. Very compelling. To summarize, media advocacy campaigns work upstream by trying to improve through policy changes the environments in which people live.